Bojo and hello, I'm James and I'll be your host for this season of the Everyday Forum podcast, an original Stratfest at Home podcast showcasing a sampling of the thought-provoking discussions from the Stratford Festival's 2025 Meighen Forum, the festival within the festival designed to enhance and contextualize the performances in the main Stratford Festival season. The following discussion was recorded in front of a live audience in Lazaretus Hall at the Tom Patterson Theatre in Stratford, Ontario, Canada. Enjoy!
Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Gregory McLaughlin, and on behalf of the Meighen Forum, I'd like to welcome you all, and I'm so pleased that you would join us this morning for this conversation on storytelling and the oral tradition from mythology to modernity. Oral storytelling is something we celebrate every day with every performance here at the Stratford Festival. It is a tradition older than the Odyssey and one that transcends culture. It is such an integral part of the human experience that we fight for language rights to be able to continue to share our stories. In the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's 94 calls to action, calls 13 through 17 focus on language and culture, including specifically call 13, calling upon the federal government to acknowledge that Aboriginal rights include Aboriginal language rights. We gather here today for this conversation on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Attawandaron. Their long-standing and continued stewardship of this land and its waterways has afforded us the opportunity to have this gathering to talk about storytelling. In turn, it is our responsibility to share in that stewardship and to work towards being better treaty partners so that stories of all kinds can continue to be told here for generations to come. We have a fantastic panel joining us this morning. I'm going to turn it over to our panel today to introduce themselves, but if you could please help me in welcoming them one more time this morning.
Right, so I'm not actually a member of the panel, I'm the moderator. My name is David Prosser. I used to work at the festival, but I've been retired since 2020, but they bring me back occasionally. So that's all you need to know about me. But what we're going to do now is to ask our panelists to introduce themselves rather than have me do it. So let's go in order. Let's start here with Adriana.
Great. So my name is Adriana Brook, and I'm an assistant professor in the teaching stream at the University of Toronto in the Department of Classics. And the main focus of my job is pedagogy, mostly teaching people Greek and Latin. But my doctoral research was on Greek tragedy, and all things Greek literature are very dear to me, so I'm also here with that lens in front of my eyes as well.
Hi there, my name's Erin Shields. I'm a playwright. I've been working in theater for about 30 years now, I guess. Started out as an actor and writing work for myself to perform, and my friends like Mev Beatty, who's the star of the Stratford Festival. We started out together performing shows on stages in Toronto. At the Stratford Festival, I've worked here twice before. I did the adaptation of Paradise Lost in 2018. And then a couple years ago, I wrote some additional text for Much Ado About Nothing, directed by Chris Abraham. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, and I've written Ransacking Troy.
Which we just saw last night.
Which is currently on stage.
And for sale in the lobby.
Yes, for sale in the lobby. Yes. And you should see it if you haven't already.
So, let's see. Dance. Wapansano. Yes, wapansano. Nia Nehiyaw eskwel, nia poguchi wapoguni, nia oche aiksagaigan. So, I'm Trina Moyan. But I am Nehiyaw eskwel, a four-bodied human being. You know my people as the Cree, but that was an exonym that was placed upon us by the French. Because when we saw them coming up the St. Lawrence River, we yelled out to our people and we said, "Woo-hoo-hoo, they're coming." And so the French called us La Crie, the cry. I like that. but we're okay with that. You can call us Cree. So I'm from the Cree Confederacy, but Nehiyaw in particular, which are the Plains people. So I'm from Ayik-Sagaigan, the Frog Lake First Nation in northern Alberta. So you will find my people were the largest in terms of numbers. You will find Cree people from coast to coast. We're the largest group of Indigenous people in Canada. And I wanted to thank I think it's Gregory, and yeah, thank you for the beautiful opening and really recognizing and honoring those calls to action in terms of language, Indigenous language. My language is not endangered, but many, many are in this country. So thank you for being here, and thank you to these beautiful people I'm sitting with today. So that's the proper way to introduce myself. But in terms of my profession, what I do professionally, when I was a little girl, I got tired of seeing all the bad news on television, and I told my parents, it's not true. We're not terrible Native people. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to tell stories on television. So after a long, long journey, I did eventually do that, and I ended up working with the Aboriginal People's Television Network and produced and directed and wrote a variety of different documentaries. And then I moved to Toronto, where I helped co-produce the National Aboriginal Achievement Awards, today known as the Inspire Awards. And of course, that was a grand scale production. The founder, John Kimbell, he's a Ganyan Gahaga Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois, the Six Nations. He's the world's first symphonic conductor of Indigenous heritage. So he raised $3 million for that show and won international awards for the theater and the set design. So I got to work on that show. So that's actually my beginning of theater. But today I do some acting, some writing. I'm a published playwright, and yada, yada, yada. So,
Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves to the group and sparing me the task of having to do it. Oral tradition we're talking about. And it occurs to me, I grew up in Scotland, and one of my earliest memories is of my father telling me stories at bedtime. And I mean, I don't remember the stories. All I remember was that the prime character in them seemed to be a creature called the Shughly Beastie. And I don't know if he made that up or if it came from anywhere. But anyway, the point of that is that I guess most of our experience of storytelling is oral. I mean, before we learn to read, most of us are probably told stories, whether the parent is reading the story or making it up, but nonetheless, we're taking it in through our ears. So that's interesting. So I just mentioned that as a way into saying, what exactly do we mean by this fundamental thing in all of our experiences? What do we mean by the term oral tradition exactly? Because I think that when you delve into it, there's a lot of different meanings. So I'm gonna ask each of our panelists in turn, but feel free to interrupt each other, what the term oral tradition actually means to you. And I guess we'll just start in the same order. Adriana.
Sure. So in my guise as a classicist here today, the oral tradition, it always starts with Homer. And so, of course, that's very topical for the play Ransacking Troy, which I saw last night, and I echo the recommendation to go and see it if you haven't yet. But when we're talking about the ancient Greek world, we're talking about a tradition of bards. And the Greek word for that is rhapsodos, which literally means stitcher or sewer of songs. So you're taking these disparate pieces and you're putting them together into something coherent. And that tradition of storytelling continues over centuries and centuries, eventually gets written down, but it starts out as an oral tradition. And these are stories that everybody knows. You hear them at festivals, you hear them at weddings, you hear them at dinner parties, and it's one of the things that unifies the Greeks as the Greeks, because this is a question that Herodotus asks. Well, how do we know who the Greeks are? Well, one of the things is we share stories. And I think that's true of most storytelling traditions, whether that's the things that you hear from your parents, right? And that creates the community of your family, or, stories that we share more broadly. But in the classical world, it really does start with Homer, and then different authors pick up and use elements of Homer and those myths. They're all interwoven. If you tug on one thread, you'll find that it connects you to all kinds of different stories that eventually get written down, but they start out being told out loud.
Oh, that's great. I love this sort of stitcher of stories together. In some ways, that's kind of how I think of my job. One thing I love to do in playwriting is to interact with these ancient stories, which I've done with Ransacking Troy, where, Ransacking Troy, I read the Iliad, the Odyssey. I've been a big fan of sort of all the plays, so Euripides, Sophocles, plus all of these myths. And so the act of writing this play actually in some ways was to sort of have this whole pantheon of stories, and to sort of take a little bit of this and take a little bit of that and take a little bit of this, which is, to me, kind of what oral storytelling is. And then, of course, the theater, which is, my art form, is all about speaking it and telling it. I was saying earlier today, it's fascinating to work at the Stratford Festival, which is sort of the Rolls Royce of theaters in Canada. Not only because you have beautiful spaces like this, and every single person, there's so many people working on this show. I can't even believe I turned the corner backstage and there's, 10 women doing people's hair and stuff, and it's just extraordinary. But you have lunch with the actors in your show, and they can't help but start quoting Shakespeare and Ibsen and talking about, when I was with so-and-so on this show, this happened, and then I had to go on as the understudy. So all of these stories about telling stories are being told, and I'm gathering them up, turn them into another play.
We're going to come back to the idea of storytelling in a moment. But Trina, I think for you, the oral tradition is perhaps something more than just telling stories. Am I right?
Yeah. When we met for a visit before coming here. And so one thing's for sure is this, for us, it's not, and I can only speak for my people, the Nehiyaw. And if you don't know, there are more than like 1,000 different indigenous peoples, Native American people, nations across Turtle Island. So Nehiyaw, I know this about what comes from your mouth, because we call ourselves the Ahjakusowak, the star people, the spirit people. So growing up, we were always reminded or warned by my nukum and my chapa and numosho, my elders, that what you say, what comes from here, truly is it's your energy, it's your spirit, it's your intention. So be careful when you share that, because what you send out into the world, and you can feel it now as I'm speaking to you, you're receiving it. So it's that call, and then you're going to respond. So that idea of, I guess, an oral tradition is set deeply in the responsibility of being respectful, being kind. All of those grandfather teachings you've probably heard about. For my people, they're the pipe laws. And you've probably seen in films, indigenous people smoking the peace pipe and the teepee, maybe. What we're really doing, and I just came from ceremony, I'm a sun dancer. When we pass that peace pipe, we're actually asking Creator to ensure that we speak and share with the idea of upholding those laws. So the number one law for my people is wakotoin, to love, deeply love all of life, all of creation. So, and then you go through, right? Then we go around again and we smoke. Then we smoke to honesty. And then we smoke to humility. Then we spoke to respect. And then eventually you arrive at wisdom, that last law. Let's hope together that we have wisdom. So that's really the foundation of that oral tradition for me.
So it goes far beyond storytelling. It's a way of creating, well, creating civilization, creating a culture, creating a sense of identity.
Identity, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Is that still true for? Well, is that what theater does? Do you think, Erin?
Yeah, I think it creates identity. I also think it creates community. You know, one thing I love about theater is that it necessitates an audience. So unlike, painting a picture or even composing music, you can do that on your own. And so while I, sit and write on my own and then, start with myself, the one obsession, and then bring it to the director, and the director takes on the obsession. It's like a bit of a contagion. And then you get into the rehearsal hall and the actors and designers start taking on the obsession. And you, throughout, I'm sort of learning about what the play is. So a play isn't just ever, what I've envisioned in my room on my own. It is something that I create this sort of blueprint and leave lots of spaces for the actors and director and designers to bring their artistry to it. So the whole thing is getting bigger than the sum of its parts as we go. And then the final step, the most important step, really is the audience. Because the play doesn't actually exist until it's live. And the thing that we activate is the space between the performers and the audience. And if you can do it right when it's really working, I know when I'm in the audience, you feel connected to the other people in the audience. You're having a very similar in sync experience of art together. And that to me is what's so powerful about theater as an art form.
Well, and I was going to say that when we were chatting before, when you're watching a play in the Tom Patterson Theater, you're not just watching the actors, you're watching the other audience members too. And that's part of the experience of hearing the oral stories, watching other people react and estimating to what degree my reaction is the same or different and why might that be. And there's sort of like a very human component to it, not just, watching a play.
Absolutely. Or when, one person laughs. You said this
Right.
last night. You had the experience of laughing when no one else
was
did.
laughing.
And
I was wondering, why am I laughing at this part?
I love that because it's like, oh, what did that person get? Oh, I'm going to pay a bit more attention.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, did I miss the joke?
Yeah, totally.
And of course, in that laughter, or in, let's say, the shared grief, if you want to call it that, at the end of a Greek tragedy or King Lear or whatever, there is that catharsis, isn't there? There's, a Greek word. Tell us about catharsis.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, Adriana, tell us about catharsis.
Oh no, this is my joy to be here and nerd out about Greek tragedy.
That's your catharsis, yes.
Yeah, well, it's Aristotle. It's he says it's what we get once we've been through the experience of watching the play. It literally means like purifying, but you have pity and fear for what's happening on stage, and by going through that experience, you come out the other side changed somehow. Yeah, but what I was thinking about your question of community. It made me think of how, at least in the ancient Greek world, this oral tradition, it almost becomes a kind of currency that you can use, which is a strange way to think about it, like in a sort of transactional way, but that everybody knows the same stories, and so you can use that to connect with other people and to be part of something together. I think one of the most well-known examples of this is at the symposium, where you sort of have this conversational currency. Can you pull out the right Homeric quotation at the right moment? And even Plato, who is famously very anti-poetry, in the Republic, he says, well, if we in an ideal city, we would banish all the poets. And yet he peppers all of his dialogues with Homeric quotation. He knows his Homer as well as anybody else. And so, there's kind of an economy to everybody knowing the same set of traditions. And I was thinking about that in the context of Ransacking Troy, where people in the audience will come to the theater with different levels of knowledge of ancient Greek myth. But I think most people will have some idea of, they know something about, I don't know, Achilles, or they've heard the name, or the Trojan horse, right? There are these things that are sort of just in the ether, and that's something that we bring to us as part of the community of people watching a play.
Is that true for you too? Given you talked about the variety, the multiplicity of First Nations. Is there the same kind of multiplicity of mythologies, for that, to use that word, or do people, like in the West, have that kind of common?
Well, I think I was thinking about catharsis. So
well, continue thinking about
right.
that.
And so, and we know that Canada. And if you don't remember the word Canada, what it means, does anybody remember?
Village of small huts.
So it's the village. So Canada, the village. So when we talk about Canadian history, we're talking about our collective community, our history. So there isn't a separation between Indigenous and Canadian history. It is Indigenous history. But a part of this process of healing and catharsis is being able to share that with you. So, but back to this idea of community, and that's why we sit in a circle. So Indigenous people, we have to sit in a circle because we all matter. We're all equal. And a part of that healing or storytelling, I guess, I don't like to call it storytelling, because for us, what's embedded inside the story, it's the code of ethics, how to live. So those stories are filled with all kinds of tragedy and joy and love and pain and healing and honor and all the same things that all human beings, that all two-leggeds experience. But this moment when we're going around the circle, just sitting at home recently, on the plains there with my people on the Sundance grounds, visiting, listening, going around and around and around, and people are sharing story. And what comes out of that is a grander story and the healing. So Canada is still in a healing moment in terms of that reconnection with the truth about Indigenous history, which is Canadian history. And what you've probably noted if you've been watching or you've been able to attend any Indigenous plays, those are those themes that are set inside. So it's not just a healing for us, but it's a healing for all Canadians to come back to your truth about this land. So I have so much I could say, but I'll leave it at that.
Erin, when you are writing a play, and perhaps specifically this play, I don't know, does that idea of healing, transforming the audience? I noticed in the description for this event where there's something about storytelling, to use that word, as transformative. Do you consciously set out to do that at all when writing a play?
I don't think that's not my sort of guiding drive, is to transform people. But for me, I would say theater at its best sort of cracks us open, either in a little way or a big way. I think we walk around the world, we get set in whatever ways we have, and we have routines in our life that we do. We have relationships that are familiar, and we repeat the same conversations with our partners and our children. Clean your room. And when you go to the theater, not just theater, other arts as well, you can have an experience, there's a potential to have an experience where part of that armor, part of that daily repetition gets sort of cracked open a bit. And a part of you that's usually left untouched, left sort of deep in there, could be a little bit of you from childhood, could be a teenage rebellious feeling, could be a memory, sort of gets cracked open, and you go, oh yeah, that little bit of myself. Oh yeah, okay, cool. And then I think we take that as we leave the theater, and it comes into our lives, and we can feed it back into those repetitions. It disrupts us in a way, which I think can lead to transformations large and very small.
I'm going to go back to Homer for a moment. Did Homer actually exist?
That's a great question. The ancient Greeks thought so. They thought there was one guy called Homer, and there's a whole tradition of who he was and what island he came from. He was a blind bard. Da, da, da. The modern day scholars are not quite so settled on the question. There's basically two camps. There's the Unitarians who think, yes, there was one genius person who conceived all of the Iliad and all of the Odyssey in his amazing brain, and then it got passed down. And then there's the camp called the Analysts that say, no, it wasn't just one person. It was a bardic tradition. And I think most people have sort of settled into that camp, that basically over time the same stories get told and bards learn from other bards, and you go to a different festival and you hear the same story told a different way. And then in the early 20th century, there were a pair of anthropologists, Lord and Perry, who went and did field work in the former Yugoslavia. And they found bards who could memorize 12,000-line poems. And they were able, by seeing this modern analog, to imagine how an ancient Greek bard would have done it. So it has everything to do with sort of the puzzle pieces that allow you to make up a line of poetry. So for Homer, that's dactylic hexameter. And so you have, little set phrases, epithets like rosy-fingered Dawn or swift-footed Achilles that you can pull out again and again, and you know exactly where they fit in the line. You have these sort of stock scenes, sacrifice and then a feast, right? They always put the thigh bones to burn them on the altars, right? Like you always know that's going to happen. Or ring composition, where you start and you say, well, when Odysseus went to the camp of Diomedes, da 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 da, and then you get to the end of the story. And so after Odysseus went to the camp of Diomedes, and so they were able to find all these sort of pragmatic, practical explanations for how somebody could possibly not only keep that many lines of poetry in their head, but could actually easily compose it on the spot. And so the sort of, I think, most favored explanation of how the Homeric epics came to be is that there was this tradition floating around for centuries, but then when writing comes back, the Greeks are able to write and then they lose it, and then it comes back in the 8th century or so. That's when they sort of crystallize into a form that's written and it stops changing. It becomes this kind of canonical text. And then there's the Library of Alexandria, where we have all these scholars in the 3rd century who are sort of like editing the text and saying, no, this is the definitive one. And so that's the one that comes down to us today.
So you have this technology, writing, that somehow, in a sense, it's not exactly stifles that ongoing creative process, but kind of freezes it a bit in time, yeah?
Well, it just changes the nature of your creative interaction with the poem. Instead of creating the poem, you're responding to it, right? So then you get Virgil, who's basically saying, well, I know my Homer, but let me tell you, let me tell you this other way that we can think about this tradition. Yeah.
And it's interesting because John Milton was setting out to write an epic like Homer and Virgil, and it was a conscious effort to write the great English epic in the style of. So yeah, it's
and then you came along.
And then I came along, messed around with all of them.
Well, I mean, but that's that's encouraging that a story can exist in so-called canonical form, but still be played with, still be reworked and rethought.
And what I do find interesting in both when I was working with Milton and when I was working with these texts is, and maybe because I come from an acting background and because I'm putting it into words, I found it essential to read it out loud as I was working with it. Because it really does, it's just like Shakespeare. You read Milton or Homer in a good translation, and you can feel it in your body. And it sort of tells you, it gives you information just by feeding it through your own body, which I think is connected to this oral piece of it, And Milton dictated Paradise Lost as well, because he was blind when he wrote that. Oh, these blind writers.
Yeah.
And so there's something quite interesting about that.
Huh.
And Trina, what is there a kind of, are there canonical preservations in print?
So there's this I love what we're talking about here. Did Homer exist? We have a character, a person, a man, a human being that we believe existed. His name was Wesehuian, and he was this profound storyteller. Anyway, so many songs, many prayers, ceremony came from this grand being. And my grandmother, my nukum, she recites this detailed experience of Wesehuian, and he goes and he speaks with the little people, and he receives all these songs and prayers, and they give him this power, lightning in his hair, and when he shakes his hair, it's just, but it just made you made me, like, when we're talking about Homer, did he exist? We always wondered, did Wesehuian really exist? Except for that, my nukum and my people say, absolutely. Where else did we receive all these songs and these prayers and these ceremonies from? So anyway, that was my thought connected to that. And then about memorization, I mean, if you're familiar with the Haudenosaunee's Thanksgiving address, it is this long, beautiful piece. And when the Haudenosaunee gather, it's from memory in absolute detail that they recite it. And it is the most beautiful Thanksgiving. My husband, who I mentioned, John Campbell, he's from Ganawage. And when the people gather to honor that prayer, they do it for weeks and weeks, reciting this by memory. And then, of course, he's a symphonic conductor, so he's remembering pages and pages and pages of music for every single instrument. And what he does is he connects that moment of the Thanksgiving address and the beauty of memory and the meaning of all of that to the music that he's conducting. And it made me think of all of this. So, about what was your question? I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
You saying that, it makes me wonder if maybe one distinction between sort of an oral tradition and a written tradition is the permission to have these kind of different iterations. Like, I don't know, if we think about fairy tales, right? We can say, like, oh, well, everyone knows the story of Cinderella as an example. And it doesn't have to be word for word, right? It's still the story of Cinderella. Even if people tell it in greater or lesser detail, it's longer. It's, it's got the happy ending, or the horrible
Birds
one,
pucking
where
the
they
eyes.
have to chop off her toes, and and yet it still falls under the umbrella of, yes, this is a fairy tale that people who sort of are part of the tradition that tells this story, they can all easily identify it, and so maybe there's something about the kind of malleability or the flexibility of the story, and yet it remains the same story that's special about oral storytelling.
And again, it's about that intention in the moment. Who's, like, right now, I'm speaking from my spirit to you, and what's coming out of me is being adjusted for you. So I didn't come up here with a script memorized for you. I'm feeling in the moment what we're sharing, and I'm trying to responsibly then share it with all of you. And that's the beauty of the story. So I was not trained within the Western theater. I received my understanding of how stories should be told by my elders. And I see a lot of elders in this room. And I'm sure that you, in your own way, have influenced your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren about your stories and how they're to be told. And what's inside of those stories is you're ensuring that that they carry on for generations to come, and that the purpose is that they then know their identity, who they are, where they come from, what their responsibilities are, all of those things. And that's what the intention of the story is. So when we're telling stories, it's really about changing it, shifting it, allowing it to become organically what it needs to be for all of us in the room.
Which I suppose, to maybe put that another way, is a bit like it's breaking down the barrier between the creator, if you like, or the deliverer of the story or the tradition, and the recipient, because I'm just trying to imagine how this worked in the early days. So we have a circle of people in whatever culture, say, sitting around a fire, and they start telling stories, but they're all participating in that, and they're all absorbing some of it and then telling it on in their turn, right? So it's a kind of, it's a kind of method of transmission in which everyone gets to be a creator in some way, right?
And I think for me, like having my first, experiences in theater were with Indigenous people. And so the way that we shared was this very fluid, organic, beautiful moment. And then after that, I had experiences with non-Indigenous people in theater. And that was completely different. And it was a little bit jarring. It was a little bit abusive because that Western patriarchal competitive influence is bedded inside somewhere. So trying to break through that, I think, is my responsibility when I'm in theater now. How do we change that so it becomes more of what we're talking about here? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people, well, Shakespeare, for instance, there are diehards who say, well, I've got a copy of Romeo and Juliet here at home, and they don't say this. Or whereas the whole purpose of theater is to kind of, even if you're doing Shakespeare and doing it relatively as it is on the page, reinventing it, as you mentioned with Much Ado, you did a wee bit of not reinventioning, but you added some context.
And here there's a great library archive of all the director's cuts of the plays. So when I was working on Much Ado, I got my hands on these texts. And what it is basically, every single Shakespeare you see here, everywhere, has been cut by the director or somebody else. So for lots of different reasons, often racism, trying to cut some of that out of there. Trying to, even just wanting to move a scene from this place to tell the story the way the director's envisioning it. And you can go and you can see exactly which cuts have been made. And it's a fascinating record of how these stories that we are all very familiar with have been told in just slightly different ways, which I think is so cool. Yeah.
And you certainly did it last night. That was amazing. I was thinking, wow, because I come from a matriarchal civilization, and here you are celebrating these grand women. Yeah. And taking the liberty to change it the way you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of my impulse with this play and with other texts that I do is as I do fall deeply in love with the Homer, the plays. But then I also am feeling this tug of like, oh, what about the women?
Yeah, what about the women?
These dudes have so much time we have so much time to sit with these men, particularly in the Iliad, and like this journey they're going on, this in war, very emotional journey too. These manly men crying all the time over their, we have this idea of manly man as like never crying. Well, I'm telling you, these guys are definitely manly and they're crying a lot. So yeah, just sort of approaching this and being like, well, what about, I wish I knew a bit more about how Clytemnestra feels about having her daughter murdered and then her husband goes off and she's just left with grief for 10 years. What is that?
Yeah. And you know what I thought? My mother's a residential school survivor. That's exactly what I was watching last night. How did my grandmother cope with her children being ripped from her? How did she cope with her husband going and serving in the Second World War? She was alone and lost her children to the residential school. And you made me think of that. And I was comforted to know that somehow we're connecting in this way. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Actually, that's a point. We're sitting here with a panel of an all-female panel, and we're talking in part about, as you said, classics of antiquity in which so many of the characters are male. I know, Adriana, we don't know much about this, if anything, but in your thought, I mean, how many of the people who contributed to these stories that helped to create them orally, how many of them were female? Any ideas?
Well, if we're talking about an oral tradition, we don't really know because the oral tradition does not survive. We can't find scraps of papyrus or, works that were edited in the Library of Alexandria, with very few exceptions, right? There's Sappho, there's Corinna, but there aren't a lot of female authors that we know of, and if they even did exist, their work may not have been preserved. So it's overwhelmingly male, and a lot of male authors are interested in trying to uncover a female perspective. I would say that Euripides is one of the better authors at doing this. But I was thinking, the question of Clytemnestra, how did she feel? How did she, react after having lost her daughter in this terrible way? And then she just has to sit with this for 10 years. Well, Aeschylus and actually the two other great Greek tragic authors that survived to us, they all have their version of this story. And it's brutal, right? She murders her husband in vengeance, and then her children kill her. And so even these sort of...
that happens after 10 years.
Happens after 10 years, yeah.
Yeah.
But these stories that sort of aim to see the female perspective, they're still cast through a very male lens, I think. And one of the amazing epithets that's given to Clytemnestra at the beginning of Aeschylus's play about the murder of Agamemnon, and he gets home from Troy, is that she's man planning, like androbulos. Her mind thinks like a man, and that's the only way that this playwright can conceive of her having this agency, right? It's that she's so scary. The reason why this woman is so terrifying is because she takes on these kind of manly qualities, but in the guise of a woman. So yeah, it's testosterone city in ancient Greek literature. It's even the stories that aim to help us see the world from a female perspective, I think still have that thread of, but it was still written by a man.
Yeah, that's part of the reason too for this conceiving of this story. I wanted it to be not the story of one epic hero going on an epic journey. I wanted it to be the story of a collective of women, and that they would all take responsibility for telling the story. So the play starts, Clytemnestra and Penelope go, oh yeah, I think we have to tell the story. And then immediately everybody else is like, yes, let's tell it. And so the experience of writing it and rehearsing it and watching it should be that, you're watching a group of people, a group of women tell this story. And there's not one that's more important than another. They each have their role to play in how they accomplish what they accomplish. And, everyone is needed. Everyone's necessary, which is how communities actually work.
Yeah. And I was so moved because, of course, being a First Nations woman, I'm always thinking through that lens, seeing the power of the women on stage like that. And then I thought of how all of the demonstrations or the protests, I would say in North America, they're led by women. They're led by the grandmothers. They're led by the women. And what are they fighting for? They're fighting for the health of, number one, Mother Earth. They're fighting for the health of the water and the land and the plant beings, because they know that's the root. That is what we need to survive, and to change the way we think. And so I thought of all those women on stage and all of the First Nations, Indigenous, Native American women gathering and fighting for this together. Yeah, for a better life.
Yep.
Yeah.
So assuming that the ancient classics were largely created by men and embody a male vision of women, in a matriarchal society, any thoughts on how the creators of those view men?
Yeah. So, and for my people, so when we say that we're a matriarchal civilization, it's not that we're saying we're better than men. That's not what this is about. It's about respecting life itself. And we know that we were all carried in those sacred waters within our mother's womb. And so what I know amongst my people is that the women then, they're the ones who give birth. They're the ones who are watching those little ones grow. They're the ones that see, oh, who has the gift of, I don't know, singing, or the gift of listening, the gift of dancing or praying or art, or what they're seeing those gifts. Who's going to be the hunter and the fisher? all of those gifts, and then those women identify the place that those little children, the place that they need to serve in the community. So that's really what the matriarchs are about, witnessing life itself and then defining what role they play in the community. And so in my language, Nehiyaw is man, and it literally means that powerful being that's standing, protecting. And then in Cree, Isquel, the root is fire. So when I say Isquel, I'm actually saying that I come from that fire of life and that I can give that fire. So it's all respect. It's not about men being lesser. It's about identifying all of our gifts and working together. That's really, I don't know if I answered the question.
That's great, Trina.
Yes, you did. And again, it doesn't matter. All you have to do is be interesting. Just because it says down here that we're going to explore these issues doesn't mean we're going to. Here's a thought. I mentioned the technology of writing, and I'm interested in the effects of technology on the way we live. I've never seen a superhero movie except Christopher Reeve's Superman way back in the last century. And yet I can't avoid reading about superhero movies because, it seems to be the only kind of movies anyone makes anymore. And I get the impression that these are like the modern day equivalents of the Greek myths, that these characters with extraordinary powers keep cropping up in different ways, in different versions of the story, in reboots. And I have two thoughts about that. One is this sounding the knell of the oral tradition in some way? The fact that we have the cinematic technology, we have the electronic technology, and the other one is, are there new modern versions of the oral tradition? So maybe those are the same question. I'm just going to throw it out this to all of you. What does the oral tradition look like today?
Well, just to pick up on your superhero thing,
Yeah.
I do enjoy a good superhero movie.
Well, it's the men in tights, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And the women, obviously. And part of Ransacking Troy, I'm borrowing from that form. There's a very specific form with those films that works. And when they deviate too far from it, you're like, boring. You're trying to be too silly, or you're trying to, it's the hidden identity and this sort of the struggle of self while protecting others. So I did sort of channel some of that certainly in the first half of my play. And it did make me think about form. And I think form is important with these stories when you did such a great job, Adriana, of explaining sort of this, how these forms work so we can remember them. And I'm sure in some stories that you have too, there's repetition, right? And so having those forms in place that we can use to tell stories helps us be able to tell those stories.
In terms of the question of technology, and this is something that we talked about when we met, to prepare for this panel, I think one thing that the advent of new technologies may be putting in jeopardy is sort of the communal aspect of oral storytelling, because you can watch a movie by yourself. You can't. Well, I suppose you could watch a play by yourself, but that would be a rare.
There are specific people who do that. But yeah.
But then we were also talking about the podcast. This is an oral storytelling form that has no occasion. You listen to a podcast when you're folding your laundry. You do it by yourself, and there's a communal aspect. There are, robust communities of people who listen to the same podcast, and they, communicate online, or, you pay your $5 a month and you join the, bonus podcast episode crew. But the idea that telling stories necessitates being in community, I think, is being somewhat eroded by the new technologies that we have to sort of, it proliferates storytelling. It's easy to access a story when you want one for whatever reason, but it means that you're not necessarily listening to that story collectively with the other people who share in that tradition. And that's a big change, I think.
And in the Indigenous community, this is a huge debate that's going on, especially with, artificial intelligence and augmented reality and QR codes. And so my oldest boy, he actually does this for a living. So he creates virtual reality moments, and you can scan the QR code. But what he's done, and we've debated this, how do we respect the oral tradition? And then put it into this technology where you tap your phone and there I am telling you the story. So we've sort of concluded that, okay, so Mom, you'll tell the story live, you'll share the story, and then we give the audience or those who are engaging with us the opportunity to then QR code it. And what is that experience? So it's difficult because we have some elders who are all for it because they are trying to push back against this idea that we are just set sort of in stone. When we go back to, petroglyphs, what's set in stone? Is it solidly just that forever? And so some of those elders are talking about, we've always evolved as Indigenous people. We never just stayed the same. We came up with some of the most innovative, technologies, but nobody knows that, from, canoes and kayaks and goggles and popcorn and the vast medicine knowledge that we have that we all are benefiting from today. So there's a lot there to be said about where do we move responsibly into these technologies? How much should we be sharing? There are certain stories and songs that you only sing in deep ceremony and you never speak of them. So how do we hold those with respect while still moving forward? Yeah.
Actually, you mentioned song just now, and that's something we haven't touched on, because we've talked about people speaking, but singing is, everybody, like, we know the words of the songs that we heard in 1964, or at least some of us do.
Yeah.
I don't know if we plunge into this at all. What place does song have in the oral tradition? You mentioned rhapsos?
Rhapsodos.
Sorry, one of my big regrets in life is that although I took Latin, I never took Greek.
You missed out.
I did. Oh, tell me. But I'm thinking rhapsody.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Where does song fit into this? Is that how important a component of the oral tradition is song?
Well, very briefly, for the ancient Greeks, they're inseparable. The Homeric or epics are sung, not spoken, right? They're in meter, they're accompanied, they're songs. They're not just poems.
Yeah, absolutely. I could go on and on about songs.
Yeah, you really lit up, Trina. You were like,
So short story. So my mother, when she was living back on our First Nation, she's moving into her 80s now, so we had to move her to Red Deer. But when she was on our First Nation, she grew all the medicines. And I was looking at her tobacco, and I said, Mom, your tobacco's so big and beautiful. And so she gave me some of those seeds. And she said, you go back to Toronto and you plant those seeds. You grow your tobacco. So I threw them in my yard and they didn't grow. So I called Mom and I said, Mom, why isn't my tobacco growing? Well, she said, well, did you sing the songs? I said, what songs? What are you talking about? I don't know the tobacco songs. She said, that's okay. You go ahead and sing those songs. What songs? The songs from me that I create from my spirit. So I started making up songs for the tobacco. And what that did for me was I was then tending to the seeds every day, going and singing to them, making sure that they got just the right amount of water, just the right amount of dirt, ensuring that the wind didn't blow them away, putting up little barriers for them because I was singing the songs. So, and then the language is all embedded in the song. So I grow my own sweetgrass, and the tradition is always you carry sweetgrass when you're speaking because it grounds you to the earth to be responsible. So you carry that sweetgrass or a grandfather rock. And this is just in my family. But amongst my people, I've noticed everybody carries some sweetgrass. So because it reminds you that you come from the earth. Right? This beautiful sweetgrass. And when we harvest it and we clean it and then we braid it, and you always braid it with the other person. And what do? You sing a song. So I was asking my parents for a song because I'm like an intermediate, I guess, language speaker. but I'm struggling because I'm far away from my mom and dad, and they speak fluent Cree, Nehiyaw, Win, the four-bodied language. It's so lovely. So I said, Mom, I need a sweetgrass song. Sing a song. So I did. Wigask miosen, wigask miosen, kananas konten. Anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is that now that the song's in my mind, it's in my heart, and I learned so many words because I would go back and forth with my parents. What about this part of the song or this part of the song? So it's all there. The identity's in the song. It's in the connection to the earth, connection to self, and connection to everyone.
Yeah, there's something about having words in your head that you've memorized and that you speak them. I mean, you spoke about lunching with festival actors.
Yeah.
Having them pour all this stuff out. And I think, well, I don't know, this isn't, I don't know if this is even worth, but the act of sort of internalizing words and speaking words, there's something about that. I mean, I don't know how many of you have ever had to like speak at a funeral or deliver a eulogy or whatever. And I've watched, well, I've done it, but I've also watched people, you know, they get to a point where they break down and I'm sorry, I can't. And my technique has always been, whatever you're going to say it at least half a dozen times beforehand. Like speak it out, because that way the emotion's still there, but you've somehow gotten control of it. And I mean, is that silly or?
It's also known as rehearsal.
Well, it's yeah.
Rehearsal.
Very good, very good.
So you worked for the festival for how long?
Well, you know, but you know, but it's not just about remembering it and getting it right. It's about controlling the
Internalizing it,
and I wonder, I mean, if that's, most of us aren't actors, right? So we don't have to do this professionally, but there's something about the importance of speaking something as opposed to reading it or you know, it's different, right?
Yeah.
It's,
Well, and actors will tell you that, you know, yes, they learn their lines, but what they're looking for, what they are actually memorizing is the thoughts from line to line. So they've got the script, but they've got to get from line to line internally. And actually, that's what they're memorizing. And so a lot of the questions that I get as a playwright from the actors are them trying to create the little internal bridges for themselves between this line and this line, this scene and this scene. And I can't quite figure out where I am between here and here. Which I find absolutely fascinating. So and so the rehearsing of the lines, as you say, it's just feeding it into those wonderful actor bodies to the point where they don't have to think about it at all. So they can just be thinking as humans think in the world, and the text just comes out.
And as an actor, what you described is just perfect. That's exactly what I'm struggling with lines. I'm sitting with the director saying, but what am I feeling? What am I doing next? Where am I moving? What's my body doing? So once it's inside the body, literally you embody it. And you notice I move a lot. I need that movement to get the line so that it becomes a part of my body. Yeah.
it almost sounds like it's memorization is and doing that rehearsal process that you're talking about with actors is a way of understanding human beings better. If you can find the connection between the thought in one line and another line, you're understanding how you work as a human being. Well, enough of my ramblings. I've got a fistful of cards here from the audience. And so I think I will start to throw them at you. Fortunately, I remember to wear my glasses this time, which I usually don't. Music, song. Here's a question, and I think I probably know the answer. Does any record of the music for Homer's songs survive?
Not in the sense of musical notation or score or anything like that, but this is absolutely not my area of expertise, but there are people who sort of look at other ways of finding that out, whether it's descriptions. And I don't know if the website still exists, but there used to be a place you could go on the Princeton Classics website where they had people who tried to reconstruct what it would be to recite dactylic hexameter accompanied by the lyre. But it's a sort of combination of like very tenuous connections to ancient evidence and then looking at sort of modern traditions and how they might have evolved from the ancient past. But yeah, not a score as such.
In terms of the question regarding lack of female authors, could it be that the stories told through women's oral tradition actually survived in a somewhat changed form attributed to a male author? We all have heard of research papers stolen. Have we? Stolen from the female researcher and attributed to or published by men. And the question continues, and I have to say, this one comes as a surprise to me. For example, Harper Lee's research and writing of In Cold Blood, published under Truman Capote's name, not hers.
I didn't
know that. Is that true? Anyway, does anyone remember the question?
You know what? It makes me think of the Grimm brothers, right? Because the Grimm story tales, fairy tales that we have, were these brothers that traveled around the German countryside, listening to stories told by, I assume, men and women, and now we know them as the Grimm fairy tales, when really it is this oral tradition that they have captured. So I think absolutely, women were storytellers, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, where do you hear your first stories but from your mother, right? And that's going to be as true of Aeschylus as it is of, a child today. So, yeah, just because the stories were written down by, male authors that, then somebody thought it was worth preserving and passing down. It was all in the ether, right? Everybody in ancient Greece was participating in this same tradition of storytelling.
It actually reminds me of a story. My oldest daughter is now 15. When she was, 2 or 3, we would go tell her a bedtime story. And my husband is a theater person too. He's the executive director at Soul Pepper Theater, and so we would take turns. We'd read a story, and then we'd sing a song. So that's how it started. And then one night I was like, okay, well, I'll read a story and then I'll just tell you a story. I'll make up a story. So I made up a story and she was like, oh, I like this. Okay, great. So can you do this? Can you do this? Great. And then my husband, he couldn't remember any songs. So she'd be like, oh, you need to tell me a song. You need to tell me a song. And when they're toddlers, they can turn into these little tyrants. So he made up this story song where he would just kind of make up a story, but kind of sing it. And so finally, we ended up having like 4 parts to this bedroom routine. You read a story, you tell a story, the bad guy turns good in the end. There was this whole sort of recipe. And then I've got 3 sisters, when my sisters would come over to sort of help put Olive to bed, they were absolutely terrified because they were like, they'd be like, oh my God, okay, I got to get my story down. And then I got to have the story song. Oh my God, and they'd be like consulting one another, like what should I do for my story? Like it was kind of amazing. And she would not go to bed until this sort of recipe was completed. Yeah, it's hilarious.
I mean, you mentioned fairy tales, and it intrigues me that so many of that kind of storytelling, from my childhood Shughly Beastie to the exploits of gods on Mount Olympus, they all tend to involve the fantastic. Nobody tells their kids stories about going down to the corner store. And maybe that's just the nature of storytelling. We want something exciting, but I wonder if it's also something about is there something inherently childlike about this process in terms of the imagination, the freedom of imagination.
So for the Nehiyaw, or in my family anyway, we always say, whoever has the most stories when they're traveling back to the stars, whoever has the most stories is the winner. Yeah.
So good.
Oh, but then I wanted to add about the matriarchs.
Yeah.
Because the question was about this. For so many First Peoples, our creation stories are from woman, sky woman, right? And our story is Achakusisquel, star woman. And she's walking beyond the universe, and she sees a hole, and she sticks her head in the hole, and she sees this beautiful jewel, and she looks around and she's thinking, I want to go to that jewel. And what does she see? She sees grandmother, spider, spinning the universe. And she says, grandmother, please release me down to that jewel. And so they have a negotiation, and grandmother attaches her silvery thread to Star Woman and releases her down. And what does she do? She shares all of her songs and her stories and her waters of life and her ceremonies. And then what do we end up with? This beautiful planet we call Mother Earth. And here you all are, right? And then in the end, well, there is no end to the story, but grandmother pulls her back and to the universe, and Star Woman takes the blanket off her back and she throws it to the people, and she says, keep the star blanket, wrap yourselves in it so you remember where you come from. We are all star people, all of us. Anyway, mothers, matriarchs, the stories, right? The creation stories.
Wow. That's lovely. Thank you. Here's a deep philosophical question, perhaps. We are living in challenging times. Do you believe, and this is for anyone who cares to answer it, do you believe that the oral tradition / storytelling may protect the much needed empathy that seems to be under attack at present?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think theater is all about empathy, and I think it is the antidote to so much of what's going wrong in the world. Firstly, what this writer alludes to, the sort of the global chaos and the global chaos maker character to the south of us, who's just making chaos left, right, and center. Also, I think there is such an attention deficit in our world right now. I particularly see it with the young people I'm trying to raise. That stupid machine that we all carry in our pocket now is such a way to get away from our feelings and deeply connecting with one another and our own emotions. So even if we're upset or grieving, people turn to this thing to sort of distract themselves and get out of the feeling. In the theater, we ask very politely for everyone to turn off the machines, and you have to sit there. And it's even a challenge for my daughters to watch a movie all the way through at the moment, because their attention is this thing just is grabbing their attention so much. And so I really do believe theater is a great, healthy thing for everybody to be doing right now.
I don't want to, I agree with everything that you say about theater and empathy, but to be a downer, I also feel like storytelling has the capacity to lead us in the wrong direction. That we tell ourselves stories that then become sort of crystallized about who we are and who's on our side and who's on the other side. And I think storytelling is such a powerful force in that sense that I think it can, if it's wielded in the wrong way, it can lead us away from empathy. And that's something that we all have to take responsibility for, right? Like when we're sort of partaking in storytelling in all of its different guises, what we hear on the news or what we see on social media, or just to be aware of, what is that story, right? What is that story? What community is that story trying to define? And is that really, is that really the way the world is? Or is it more complex than that?
Mm-hmm. And is it true? Are the stories true?
Yeah.
You have fake news. We have
Yeah.
AI. We've got these fake videos. They're just inundated with all of these stories that can really lead you down to a very dark path. Yeah. So And then to your point, like you actually made me cry because I was thinking about our young people are so sad. There's so much depression and mental health issues. And it's because they're lacking that connection, right? They don't know how to socialize, to sit, to listen, to visit. They're losing that. And it's leading to sadness, depression, suicide. But how do we then, what do we do about those dark stories? How do we ensure that what we're receiving is true? And I think it comes back to what my elders say: feel it, really hear. Connect to yourself deeply. Consider what you're hearing. Follow your intuition. You know, we follow our heart. Really connect to it. And the truth, you'll find it. It's there.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that our first reaction to somebody in distress, emotional distress, is probably, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Not well, I know a really good book on self-help here that you... Interesting. All right, here's another question for everyone. How do storytellers, ancient and modern, balance the comfort that derives from hearing familiar stories with the thirst for novelty?
That's a great question.
That's what artistic directors are contending with all when they're programming seasons, because Annie is really, really selling very, very well. So there is that sort of tug of war, you know. You want to go see Annie because it's nostalgic and it's light and it's fun, but it's scary to go to a newer piece of theater to explore it. So I do think, I think something like this place here is actually kind of perfect antidote, because you can see Annie and Ransacking Troy in the same day, which is fun.
But also Ransacking Troy, I think it walks the line in its own way, in that you're drawing on a tradition that many people will have some familiarity with, and then you're also playing with it and inventing and, you know, making us see it in new ways. And so I think that's another possible way to approach, you know, the question of familiar versus new.
Yeah, it's also a good trick to get programmed. If you,
Now
it's
the
my
truth
Trojan
emerges.
horse.
Oh, very good. Well, of course, Shakespeare is, which this place was created to do, is the brilliant example, because Shakespeare can be, while keeping the story, keeping the words, can be reinvented in a seemingly infinite number of ways, right? Which is one of the reasons he's still around. As, you know, I mean, as opposed to a more, quote, naturalistic or realistic plays like say, I don't know, Private Lives. I mean, there's probably going to come a time where we don't get Noel Coward, if we haven't come to that point already. But I think we'll always get Shakespeare. Anyway, that's nothing. A question for Erin. Is there a translation of the Iliad or Odyssey that particularly influenced Ransacking Troy, or that you recommend?
Emily Wilson.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask you about translation, because I'm so curious what your favorite translations are. But Emily Wilson has written, she's American, who has recently translated both the Odyssey and the Iliad. And what I just adore about it is that she's made very thoughtful choices about how to translate. So it is in verse, but it's in iambic pentameter, because she identified that as for our English ears, what we would, that's what Shakespeare is, and it's the rhythm of the heart. And so we would understand that naturally. And the language she uses is, it's formal but not overly fussy. To me, she rides a really good line between it. But Adriana, what do you think?
Ooh, big question. I don't have a favorite translation, and I'm often thinking of this question. Gregory and I were talking about this before the panel. I'm often thinking of this in the context of what translation should I assign to my students. And so then you're thinking about, well, what is, you know, why are we reading this text together in this class? I often assign the Robert Fagles translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey, because to me, they're sort of like the Iliad, the Odyssey, the novel version. Like I find them very easy to read while still being quote unquote faithful to the original. You have to put so many scare quotes around all of these things, right? The original text. But Robert Fagles expands. So if the original book was 600 lines, his translation of it might be 800 lines. And so you sort of give something up if you're trying to remain close to the original text. But yeah, I haven't read the Emily Wilson Iliad, but I have read the Odyssey. And is she the one who gives Odysseus the epithet complicated at the beginning?
Yeah.
So Polytropos, like the man of many ways, but she translates it as complicated, which is so great. So
He's a complicated man.
Yeah. Tell me a tale of a complicated man, Muse. Like a translation is never the original text. It's its own new thing, mediated by yet another artist. And so that's a great thing to do, is to take whatever, ancient Greek text you like, pick a 10-line chunk of it, and then read 5 different translations of it. And you'll be shocked at how many liberties the translator has taken to suit whatever their purposes were. Maybe they were making a text for university kids. Maybe, they were trying to write something that could be performed, right? There's so many different goals and purposes that a translator has, and those are all baked into whatever English version you get.
I've got a translator in Quebec that I've worked with a couple of times, or 2 actually, and it's so fascinating being in that process with someone because of the questions that come to you when you're alive. They can come to you with questions, and at a certain point, I said to my translator Marie Swarda, I was like, "Oh, this is great. We should try to get this done in France as well." And she's like, "Oh no, this is the Quebec translation." I was like,
right?
It's like, oh, of course, right. Yes, of course. It's very Quebec French, as we all know, is very different than French.
French and France.
And word choices, even stuff like she'll said to me, okay, so this group of people here at the end who scream, and you say everyone screams, is that one man included in the group? Because it's all women except one man. Is he part of the people who are screaming? And I was like, yes. And she's like, okay, then it can't be elle, E-L-L-E-S, which is a collective group of women. It has to be il, I-L-S, because if there's one man in the group, it sort of poisons the batch.
It changes everything.
So everyone's a guy.
I'll be an honorary woman for today.
You're the one in the batch today.
Yeah.
I think we may have inadvertently answered this question, but I'll read it out anyway in case anyone has any further thoughts to add on this translation issue. Could you react to an observation made earlier this week? Doesn't say by whom. Could you react to the observation made earlier this week that every adaptation is a translation, and is the converse also true?
Well, I think I just said every translation is an adaptation. So yes, I will come down firmly on the side of the converse. But is every adaptation a translation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
it's a kind of translation,
but adaptation for me is, I think they're slightly different beasts. Translation, I think you're very much, one of your central goals is to honor and represent the text in its in the essence and spirit of which it was written. So you're trying to be faithful to it in more than when you're adapting it. I think when you're adapting it, you have more liberty to play within it, and that's how I would define it differently.
That's what I was thinking as well. What is the purpose of the story? What's the intention? And last night I felt it in your work. It's clear the intention is we need to celebrate women and those histories of women, etc. And you adapted it. You took that artistic license. So I think as long as it comes deeply from you, then it is true.
It makes me think of this project I've been working on for years and years and years with a deaf artist. And ASL and other deaf languages are in some ways, I guess they're not oral languages, but they are not written languages. And so and her first language is ASL. And so whenever I've been writing for her, she has to translate it to speak it in order, there is no way. And if she, I'm like, we should write together. how to record ASL as a way to share it with someone else. It's a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, you think about when you watch a TV show and there's a character using sign language, and then you have the subtitles underneath, and it's like, no, that's someone wrote that script, and then they made the gestures to match it, but they didn't. That's not what the sign. It didn't come out in that sentence form, right? There's a kind of element of artifice involved.
Which is then the question, what's lost in translation, right?
Yes. My friend says a lot. A lot is lost in translation.
My parents too. They're like, no, that's not what that means. It has to be full. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I was struck by the idea of, you translate, say, Shakespeare into, let's say, French. I mean, for many people, Shakespeare's language is rooted in the past. But if you translate it into another language, you're suddenly writing modern language, and you've got a modern play. So, I mean, that's one.
But they make choices then to
They do.
make it more in line with Molière, for example.
Yeah.
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 And
Anyway.
then it brings me to the treaties, right?
Yeah.
What was lost in translation? You had these groups of First Nations people sitting for days and weeks sometimes negotiating the treaty with someone who just learned Cree. So what was lost in the understanding of those treaties, right?
I've got two more audience questions. I don't know how much time we have for both of them, but I'll throw the one that is addressed to you, Trina. Having worked in so many media, what are some differences between bringing your culture to screen versus stage? How have you adapted your approaches across media?
Oh dear, that's a big question. Well, as we know, I mean, film and television is completely different from theater. I love theater because you're right there. I'm feeling the audience. I'm feeling your energy. So I guess I can only answer that by explaining working with Indigenous people, either in film or television or theater. We all love theater. I mean, sure, you make more money in film and television, but we know, what we call the true actors, they always return to theater. Why is that? Okay, it might have something to do with all the Western influences and the love of Shakespeare, et cetera. But I think in my work and working with Indigenous people, it's always that you're feeling it, true to the moment. And you just have that one moment to share it as deeply as possible. So I'm not sure if I'm answering that question, but film and television, it's a lot of waiting. You're standing there, you're waiting, and sometimes you lose the spirit of it, because then they're like, okay, again, take 2, take 3. So you're losing that. So I think working with Indigenous people, and myself having worked in both these fields, it's very different, and I prefer theater. It's harder, it's richer, it's truer, and you get to really tell a story and share a story. Was that?
And do it in sequence. I mean, you do a play, you're starting at the beginning, and you've got that thread, and you've got that energy, and you're right. My next line, and the next scene, and whereas in film and TV, as you say, you're sitting around. Okay, well, we're going to do scene 6 now, and
and it's not in sequence; it's all over the place.
So it must be very hard to maintain that kind of drive.
Yeah.
One last question: is that the shepherd's crook coming for me? I think it is. So it's a quick one, and I think, Erin, you've probably already answered it. And actually, you could all throw into this. How do we prepare? What should we read for the best appreciation of Ransacking Troy?
You can come to it not having read anything and fully enjoy it. If you want to enhance the experience, you can read the Iliad, the Odyssey,
Some light evening reading.
Light evening reading. Or you can read any of the plays.
Or
You
read
can
this.
read Euripides. You could read Sophocles. You could read a book of myths. You could, there's no end to the pantheon of Greek
Or
stories.
you go see one of the Thor movies.
Or Wonder Woman. See Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman.
Amazon warriors.
Now there you go. There's a female
It's a link.
mythological hero.
Yeah, they're in the Iliad. They come.
Yeah.
The Trojans call them to. Penthesilea comes and gets killed by Achilles.
Wow.
And then he's like, oh, she's hot, as she's dying.
He falls
she's
in love
dying.
with her in the moment of her death.
Well, listen, I guess we are out of time. I really want to thank you all for being part of this oral event. And of course, our distinguished panel, Trina, Erin, Adriana, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was fun.
Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you all for being here today. Erin's play Ransacking Troy is on stage now. Go see it if you haven't. It's also available in print from Playwrights Canada Press. Go read it if you haven't. Once again, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panel.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with the lively conversations and original performances on the Stratford Festival streaming service, Stratfest at Home. And for making it this far in the episode, enjoy 1 month for free. Visit stratfestathome.ca and enter code FREEMONTH. It takes you, our listeners, to make this possible. It also takes the support of our dear collaborators. Support for the Meighen Forum is generously provided by Kelly and Michael Meighen and the TR Meighen Family Foundation. Original score for the Everyday Forum podcast was provided by Hilary Adams. Production support is provided by the film production and distribution team at the Stratford Festival. That is coordinator Vilma Mancini and director Jenna McGaw. The Meighen Forum team is producing assistant Renata Hansen, associate coordinator James Hyatt, manager Gregory McLaughlin, and director Julie Miles. Special thanks to Mike Duncan, Greg Doherty, and Harper Charlton. Finally, thanks to Artistic Director Anthony Cimolino and Executive Director Anita Gaffney. From here in Stratford, Ontario, on the land of the Neutrals and the Anishinaabe, see you next time. Ba Mapi.